Good evening, everyone.
How you doing?
Hello.
Welcome. It's so good to have you all here tonight. We'll get started in about 1 minute. As we're getting started, if you could locate where that chat feature is at and open up the chat and share your name and your congregational context, that would be awesome. So open up the chat, share your name and the name of your congregation. That would be great. Thank you all for being here.
I'm trying to see where the chat's at.
All right, as you're continuing, welcome everybody. I'm Pastor Emily Carson. I serve on the staff of the Southeastern Minnesota Synod. Thank you for being here. The initial instruction is for you to, at this point, mute yourself and share over in the chat your name and your congregational context. And I'm going to share some words of introduction as we get started tonight. As I mentioned, I serve on the Synod staff. And the first thing I want to convey to you on behalf of our whole Synod staff is a word of tremendous thanks. You are council leaders, you are rostered ministers, and you are people who believe that the Spirit of God is at work in congregational life. So thank you for every hour that you donate, every dollar that you share, every time that you share your heart space with your congregation. Thank you for believing that the Spirit of God is at work in our congregations. It's Holy Week, and an additional word of thanks for sharing some time during Holy Week for this special councils as leaders. We've been gathering folks for councils and leaders for these monthly gatherings over the past year, and they've become really wonderful spaces of collaboration and shared learning. This session will be recorded. It is currently being recorded. And the hope is that you'll be able to share this recording and the tools that we're going to learn about tonight with your other council members as well. It is my great pleasure to introduce you this evening to Steve Olschlager. Steve, give a little wave. Steve is the Congregational Assessment Research Coordinator for our partners at Churchwide. And tonight he's going to introduce us to a host of resources that fall under the umbrella of Resourceful Servants. Along the way, there will be opportunities to ask questions and participate, and I encourage you to do so. At this point, Steve, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Pastor Emily, and thank you, as Pastor Emily said, to all of you for being here tonight and for your leadership. I like to say that nothing ever really happens until at least one person steps forward to lead and make a difference, whether that's a pastoral leader or a lay leader. We all have been around our congregations and other organizations long enough to know that's just the way it works, right? And God calls us to be in those places to make things happen, and it's a blessing to be able to serve. And so I just appreciate your time and passion and energy, and for you being here tonight. A little bit about myself before we get started. I'm a lay person, and I've spent about the last 8 years working at the ELCA. But just this past December, I started working full-time for my congregation as the Director of Operational Ministries. And so I'm involved in doing a lot of administrative, operational type things. And I have a new appreciation for pastors and all the things that come their way, from furnaces that don't work to leaking roofs to Wi-Fi that goes down. To squabbles and conflict and everything else. So it's been interesting. But I spent the first part of my career as an entrepreneur. I studied engineering as an undergrad and economics in grad school. And I was literally and figuratively minding my own business when my pastor called me back in 2012. And he said, I heard about this position with the ELCA. It's a stewardship position. And I have no idea whether you'd be interested in it, but I was just thinking about you as I heard about the job, and I thought I would tell you about it in case you'd want to look into it. And it was a time in my life where I was looking for a new challenge, a new opportunity, and I investigated the job and ended up there. And it was a tremendous blessing in my life to be able to sort of switch gears and focus more on my faith and to think about stewardship issues and kind of the intersection between faith and money and generosity and a lot of things that I had been doing over the years with church council and being treasurer and working on endowments and different things like that. So as part of that experience, I got involved in the particular project that we're going to talk about tonight. And that all came to be through the Lilly Endowment. And what I say about Lilly Endowment is they are a bright spot in the world of organized religion because they have a lot of money and they're passing it out, trying to figure out ways for organized religion to do what they do better, to uncover new possibilities, innovation, learnings, and all that sort of thing. And so they work across Christian denominations. There have been not only the church-wide organization, but several synods in the ELCA, seminaries that have received Lilly grants. And so this particular project goes by the title of Resourceful Servants. And the one component that we're going to talk about tonight is the congregational. And when that was first envisioned, it was thought of as being sort of a certificate program that congregations could earn a certificate. And we've actually, this is kind of the second phase of this project, and we have repositioned it instead of it being about a certificate, which the ELCA corporate attorney said, you know, it's not really a certificate if you don't have any way of verifying that congregations are doing what they say they're doing. It's really more of a self-assessment. And so that was one of the things that we did, was to change some of the wording on it. But we also had some really incredible insights from a pastor in Iowa, Dan Solomon, who talked about the idea that when we bring up the topic of stewardship to our members and supporters of our congregations, and we put before them the call to be good stewards, that in turn it makes sense for us as congregations and leaders of those congregations to take good stewardship seriously as well. And so what he saw in this particular initiative was the idea of how can we say that we take seriously how we handle people's gifts and donations, and that by focusing on best practices related to money, that it's one way of building trust and transparency and really setting the table for continued generosity. That just like we ask people to be good stewards, we take good stewardship seriously as well. And so by working on these best practices, it's a way of saying, we're trying to do our part and be as efficient and professional with your gifts as we can. And so we'll get into that in a little bit, but I have a little bit of a devotion to get us started, to get us thinking, hopefully along the right line here. And I want to use a passage of scripture from the Gospel of John, John chapter 6, verse 35. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. And what I like to think about relative to that verse is the question, what is the business that we're in as the church? And I know the church is not a business, it's an organization, but why do we exist? What are we all about? And what I think about is that Jesus is calling us to be in the bread business, to be in the business of feeding people, certainly feeding people spiritually, and in some cases, feeding people physically as well. And it occurs to me when I think about being in the bread business that there's different aspects that are involved in that. So on the one hand, there's the whole aspect of nutrition, and you might think about the food pyramid, you might think about those nutritional labels that we see on our food. How is it that we make food that really, or bread, that really fills us up, that really satisfies, not just junk food, but something that truly benefits us, sustains us, fulfills us. And so when I think about being in the bread business and I think about the church being in the bread business, to me, the parallel there is our theology and our ideas about what is it that people are really hungering and thirsting for. So that's one aspect of being in the bread business. Another aspect of being in the bread business has to do with actually baking. And how do you make something that is appetizing, that's inviting, that somebody smells the bread, they look at the bread and they say, you know what, I want to eat that. That looks delicious and it looks like something that I want to take in. And you realize that, you could be really on top of things in terms of nutrition, and that doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to have the baking part down, right? It's kind of a different skill set, just like you could be a wonderful baker and really not know very much about the nutritional aspects of what you're doing. So it's a different aspect. And all of us have the potential to do a little baking, right? But if we wanted to really scale this thing up, if we wanted to feed a lot of people, now all of a sudden you get into a whole different phase of being in the bread business. And that has to do with an organization, an enterprise. It has to do with staff. It has to do with transportation and supplies. It has to do with buildings and structures and equipment and budgets and accounting and payroll and all that sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden you realize that's a whole nother area. You could be a master baker, you could be really great at nutrition, but this whole other aspect is something that's totally different than that. And so all of these things really need to work together. They're all important if we want to be in the bread business at a scale where we can reach as many people as possible. And that's kind of the way I like to think about how all of these things work together and why they're all important. And I think sometimes, sometimes we have some different fallacies around this. One is that, the real part of the business is the baking, or the real part of the business is the nutrition. And the other stuff, especially because it involves money, we have to be there, but not really as important. And I like to think that all of those aspects are as sacred. They're all interdependent, and we need to take them all seriously and lift that up. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir here because you're all involved in these aspects. But that's how I think about this stuff holistically. And that's why I think all of these things are important. So that's the way I like to get into this particular topic. And, there's just, as I was mentioning, from my involvement in this position, Director of Operational Ministries, that I've been doing since December, there's so many different moving parts that are involved in congregational life. And it is incredible to realize all of those moving parts. At our particular congregation, we have early childhood ministries. So we have preschool and daycare. We have actually 40 employees that are involved in that aspect of our church. And we have another 15 employees that are involved on the church side in terms of ministries and music and pastors and that sort of thing. And when you start realizing all the different aspects of policy manuals and insurance coverage and paying people on time and getting them W-2s at the end of the year and budgeting, and then this past year for us was particularly challenging related to COVID, and I'm guessing, all of you have those challenges too. We had to close down our preschool and our daycare, and still find ways to kind of pay people or get them unemployment. We ended up applying for PPP grants, and I'm sure that a number of you have been involved in all of those exercises as well. We have mortgages with Thrivent, and so figuring out what we wanted to do with that, and Thrivent graciously allowed us to go into interest-only mode for 6 months so we could conserve cash. All of those different conversations and decisions and planning and projections and everything, that's all part of this side of being in the bread business. So I'm going to pause there. Any comments so far? Any of this resonate, sound familiar? It's your life, you know these details. So what we did with the congregational financial assessment, we assembled 21 best practices in 5 different categories. And our thinking was, if we could do anything to sort of get congregational leaders just to pause and say, how are we doing in these areas? Do we have anything that we could learn? Do we have anything that we could do better? Many times the urgent sort of takes over, and you get in a mode of doing what absolutely has to be done. And sometimes, certain practices are repeated over and over and over again without pausing and saying, well, maybe there's another way to do this, or maybe there's some new learning or new ideas that we could introduce. There's also the challenge, of course, and we were thinking about this, how is it that we train new generations of leaders to be aware of these aspects of the church? We always say at our congregation, when I talk with my pastor, there's so many people who don't appreciate all the things that happen behind the scenes, especially if people like us make it look easy. It seems like, oh, okay, everything just sort of happens, and isn't that amazing? But the appreciation of all the time and energy that goes into the details and making the decisions and everything else isn't fully understood. So when we get a chance to multiply leaders, to introduce new people to these particular aspects, what resources do we have to sort of bring them up to speed to say, here's how we kind of think about how we do the accounting and fund management. Here's how we kind of think about audits. Here's how we track donations. What are the ways that we bring people into this institutional knowledge and pass that on, realizing that none of us are going to be able to continue to do this stuff forever. So that was another thing that we were thinking about. And so again, the idea with the self-assessment is to kind of go through these practices one by one and just sort of say, here's how we think we're doing. And it can range anywhere from, yeah, we don't really do this at all, to the other end of the spectrum, we do this and we feel pretty confident about how we do this. And so the 5 different categories that we assembled as part of this assessment tool are human resources, finance, accounting, risk management, and stewardship. Those are the 5 categories. And all 21 of these practices are within those 5 categories. Why 21? Well, it could be 25, it could be 40. It was a place to start. And you might look at these practices and say, yeah, I don't know if I would have put these 21 as the 21 most important. Maybe I would say 15, and I would generate a different list of other ones. That's okay. This is all meant to be an effort to kind of get the ball rolling and to start getting some of these ideas organized in a way where more people can relate to them. So I'm going to share my screen and just kind of go through the website a little bit. I think that some of you have already been on it and have been clicking around, which is wonderful. It's at resourcefulservants.org, resourcefulservants.org/congregations. And let me see if I can bring this up here. Hopefully you can all see that. Okay. So when you get started, we kind of go through some of the rationale, some of what we're thinking, how we organize this site, and these 5 major categories that the best practices are assembled within, and some information about how to participate and all of that sort of stuff. We do have a place for general feedback, and actually earlier today I got some great feedback that Pastor Emily passed on from one of you, and that was great. We're always looking for ideas about how to make this better. Remember, we just kind of cooked this up from scratch. We started with a clean slate, and we're definitely using the ideas and suggestions that people send to us to sort of say, this is how this could be more useful. So please keep that kind of feedback coming. And then we have this tracking tool to be able to go in for your congregation. When you go in, you can set up an account. You can say, we're with this particular congregation. To be an admin for your congregation, you need to have a password it's the same password from your parochial report that you get every year. There's a different password every year, but Pastor Emily has all of those passwords. If you can't find yours, you can reach out to her and she can look it up for you so you can get connected. And that's just our way of making sure that whoever is connected as an admin is really somebody that represents your congregation and your team of people who are in the know about this stuff at your congregation. Once you set up your account, it is possible for you to invite other people from your team. So presumably it's not just you, but maybe at least 3 to 5 other people who are kind of in the know about how you make this stuff work at your congregation. And these are practices. So the idea is not so much that any one person has all of the knowledge about how to do this, as much as it is about we practice it. We do these things, right? So there's a difference between knowing what an audit is and actually having a specific strategy for carrying an audit out. Another thing that we did as far as the tracker for the self-assessment, we sort of said, it's not really just about doing the practice once. It's really about continuing to do the practices periodically. And so what happens with the tracker is after 18 months, a particular practice will revert back to the default score of 0, just to give you a chance to go back and say, well, we're still doing this, and this is how we feel like we're doing with this now. Under the congregations area are the 5 categories, and you can see the menu options extend from each one of those. And so I'm just going to kind of go through some of how these pages are set up. So I'm going to go to this first practice under accounting. Maintain accounting systems. So, some of these things are going to be, well, of course we do that. That's kind of a no-brainer, right? But that's not to say that it isn't still a best practice. And potentially there are still ways that we can get better at doing this. And so one of the things that we did about a year ago, it was actually going into 2020, and it looked like it was pretty good thinking with what ended up happening last year with COVID. We made a switch in our accounting system from the desktop version of QuickBooks to the online version of QuickBooks. And what that allowed us to do is to be able to interact with our accounting even when there wasn't anybody in the office at the church to do that. And because you can have multiple users and you can set up different levels of permissions, you can have somebody who has permission as your bookkeeper or your main accounting person to do most of the work. You can have other people go in and have access to reports to pull reports in read-only sort of way. And I like to say, even though that isn't it isn't an audit process, so to speak, by giving people more visibility into your accounting system, in effect, you have some real-time auditing that can happen by sharing some of those details, perhaps between the person who's doing your accounting and somebody from your finance team. And so those are some of the kinds of sharing and learning that we're hoping to stimulate. So in this particular practice, the way these practices are laid out, we start with some kind of background information about why we think it's important. We try to identify anywhere from, say, 3 to 5 to 10 resources that we think are good places to start. And so in this particular case, we have this guide from the ELCA. If I click on this, it's, I think, like a 49-page PDF. You can probably find this in other places, but you might have to dig a little bit. Hopefully, by bringing these resources together, it's kind of an easier way to find things, one-stop shopping, if you will. There are other, let's see here. Get back here. There are other books. This first one was something that's free as a PDF. This Church Finance, there's a company, and I was totally unaware of this company until I started working on this project, Church Law and Tax. They're actually a division of Christianity Today. They used to be a separate publishing company, but they have all sorts of resources, huge books that are put together by CPAs and lawyers about everything you'd ever want to know on a lot of different topics. They're not free, but they're comprehensive. And so these are also good resources to be able to do a deeper dive. Some of these resources are actually referred to in different sections because they cover a number of different topics and practices. As you scroll further down within the particular practice, you get to a discussion area. And so one of the things that we thought about was just this idea that it's not like any of us have all the answers or all the knowledge, and anything that we can do to stimulate peer-to-peer sharing, where people like you can say, hey, you know what, here's a resource that we know about that's worked out really well for us. Here's something that we did at our congregation and it worked for us, or here was something we did and this was an unintended consequence. And so what we're trying to do is to stimulate conversation that's keyword searchable, that people like you can go to and see and learn from each other. And this particular idea came to us through something that we were reading about, a website called Diabetes Daily. And they have this kind of a forum for peer-to-peer sharing. And what they found out is when people share information with their peers, in the case of diabetes, they found people had better information than what they got from their doctors about things like diet, stress, exercise, and medication, and those sorts of things. So we fully believe that there's way better information that you have, and if we can find a way to make it easier to share with each other. And so this discussion, each one of these practices has a discussion area. And so this was a comment that I had put in just about moving to the online version of QuickBooks. And then I also shared another thing here. I don't know if all of you are familiar with TechSoup, but TechSoup is an organization that is about helping for-profit companies like Intuit and Dell and Hewlett Packard sell their hardware and software to nonprofits at significantly reduced rates. And so if you go and you set up an account with TechSoup.org, you can get some great deals on hardware and software. So for example, the particular version of QuickBooks that we're using, I think if we would have purchased the normal version that's just available through their website, it would have been maybe $600 or $800 a year, and I think we pay $150 a year for it. So again, how can we create a platform or an environment where people can share this with each other and have this all sort of collected in one place? So that's just one of the 21 practices, and along the top here, I can get to the other ones that are within the accounting section. So if I go to the one about audit, conduct an annual audit, again, the same sort of setup. Here's the ELCA Congregational Audit Guide. If I go there and it goes through, you know, the different audit routines that the ELCA has provided as a template or a suggested way of doing that. So in terms of tracking all of this, I want to show you that. If I go to this link here for track progress, you do need to, again, create an account or a profile for yourself. And when you do that, you have access to just a series of questions. So each one of those practices that I was going through and showing the page, there's a spot where you can say, well, how are we doing? And the scoring goes from 0, not doing the practice at all, to 5, doing the practice and doing it well. And so behind the scenes, as you fill this out, it's keeping track. And not only is it keeping track today, but if you come back in a month or 2 months, it will provide a new score and sort of show you a history of how you're doing. And as we thought about this, again, we don't have any way of verifying or corroborating what you're saying. You know, sometimes there might be a Lake Wobegon sort of effect going on where we're Lutherans and we think we're, you know, extraordinary in everything that we do. That's possible. We don't have any way of tamping down that optimism. It's up to you. But really, it's all about getting people to say, how are we doing? And what can we learn? And how can we do it better? And what we like to say is any engagement greater than 0 is a victory, right? Anything that you do where you might learn something, or where you might tighten up something, where you might just pause and say, is there room for improvement? That is a victory. So you go through these different practices and you answer those questions. And you see across the top, as I go through these, it goes from one category to the next. Debt management, including capital campaigns. This is one that I said, well, we probably need some improvement there. Dealing with financial shortfalls. That's kind of a very relevant one for COVID times. Property management plan. Boy, I've been getting into that as I've been dealing with at our particular congregation. The congregation is 40 years old, but we have 2 different sections of our building. One that's 20 years old and the other that's 15 years old. So we're at a point where things are starting to fail. And even though we have a capital replacement fund, we don't have a lot of accurate projections about how to budget, thinking, okay, what is a realistic expectation for what we might spend this year, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And fortunately, we just came across a member in our church who does a lot of building and construction engineering, and he's actually got some great projection templates, and I'm hoping to get one of those and add those as a resource to this site under property management plan, because it's quite comprehensive. As you go through all of those, eventually you get to the end, and then you can go to the dashboard. And on the dashboard, here's where it sort of shows you what your score is. and how your score compares to where you've been in the past. And again, the idea is incremental progress, incremental improvement, and just a greater awareness and learning and intentionality about covering these things. And if you were to say, you know what, while we're at it, there's a few other things we ought to be more serious about, and you include things that we haven't included, great, wonderful. That's all part of the spirit of what we're hoping will happen. So I'm going to pause there, and maybe I'll stop. Feedback, comments, questions. You can either put them in the chat or raise your hand.
We do that. My name is Ole Olson. I'm from Central Freeport and Albert Lea. We pretty much have done this probably for quite a few years just to keep ourselves in check. We found that this year especially, well, actually the last 2 years, it's helped us to the point where we've actually been able to capitalize on what we have earned from the giving, but we've also been able to, because of things that we've done in the past for investments, we've been actually able to share that with other churches that have actually been hurting. So we get a really kind of a good feeling out of being able to do that. And what a lot of what you're saying, Steve, is correct. I mean, all of it. You have to take the time to keep checking that assessment of yourself and your church.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you for sharing that, and thanks for sharing what you've learned with other congregations, right? And I know, being in a congregation where I'm at, where we have roughly 2,000 members, and we have a lot of people who have a lot of expertise and talent and gifts, and I just appreciate in smaller congregations just the challenge of keeping everything going, because I know even in a larger congregation, everybody's busy and they've got a lot of stuff to do, and so others.
Yeah, Steve, it's Don Moyer, treasurer at Erlin Lutheran in Cannon Falls.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'll comment on, I'm kind of a rookie at this. I just took over the treasurer role in February for our congregation, and I haven't done anything outside of personal finance in my life. So I'm learning a lot as I go along.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I can see to be valuable with this program, especially if people completing the assessment were to document some of the reasons that they're responding the way they are, like an assessment tool, that'd be an invaluable thing then to pass on to someone like myself taking over a certain role, right? So that gives you an idea of what you're starting with, kind of not all the hairy details, technical details of the accounting side or bookkeeping side of the function, but just kind of a high level view of how your congregation is doing and why you figure your rate, is doing well or not doing so well, or where the improvements are needed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Actually, one of the recommendations that came in through Pastor Emily today was a similar sort of comment, even in the area where you record your score for each of the best practices, just to have a text field in there, just to be able to park some notes to say, here's why we answered this the way we did, right?
Okay. That'd be great. Good idea.
Yeah, and I don't think that would probably be too hard for us to do. So I'm going to circle back with the developer and see if we can get something like that set up. But, along those lines too, I think about just as I've gotten into my role at my congregation, and we've had some different issues happen, even something as simple as a door that isn't latching. And I realized that our senior pastor, who's been there for 30 years, he's got a lot of institutional knowledge in his head. and he knows exactly what to do. And part of what we're trying to move away from is him being the only one who knows what to do. So, in all of these cases, how do we document this within our congregation, and maybe use tools, whether it's Dropbox or Evernote or Teams or whatever you use, that would allow somebody who's never been involved before to sort of read through and understand, like, okay, so, if the furnace goes out, here's who we call. If the Wi-Fi goes down, here's what we do. These are our, particular solutions or things that we've learned over the years. And it's really great if more than just the pastor knows, how to handle those things. Actually the larger the team that's in the know, and even to know where to go to be able to look it up, right? I mean, it just makes everything function that much more easily, and not needing to have everything be on the pastor's shoulders. So, or if you're the chief layperson and you know all this information, it's just good for more people to be in the know. So,
Right.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah. I'll just comment. I was in the IT world before I retired, and it's a knowledge base. I mean, you couldn't live without a knowledge base, something that was searchable. Excuse me, that you could find answers to solutions that you're looking for. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And it's interesting too. I mean, I think there's all sorts of opportunities. I mean, even something like, when we ask people to usher, and, for those of us who have ushered and we know all the formations and the hand signals and everything, we don't think anything of it. But for people who have never done it before, even just a little 5-minute video. Here's what we do when we usher, and here's why these things are important. And we wanted to take the time to make this video so that you would feel like you had a little bit of training going into it, and you could feel more comfortable doing this. And what things along those lines could we capture in that sort of a way? I mean, when we get back to where we're meeting in person and we're counting donations again, having a little video for our counting teams to say, here's why we do the things that we do. These are the important aspects of it. And now all of a sudden you have something that you can share in terms of training new people how to get involved in those things. Others?
This is Emily. I have a question. But first a comment, which Don reminded me of. There are many of you on this call who have just stepped into new council positions and a new term that has begun, and some of you who are carrying over into a second term. So a word of thanks for having the courage to step into new roles and to trust that the Holy Spirit will guide you along the way. My question, Steve, is sometimes, at least for me and probably for many of us, when we see a list of best practices, it can create some feelings of overwhelm. Like, where do we begin? Or it can just feel overwhelming. And I loved what you said about anything you do is a victory. I was wondering, for people on this call who might be feeling like, I don't even know where to start, or this is too big of a project, what are your words of wisdom?
Well, one of the things that I'd like to show you back at the site is, it's kind of interesting. So there's sort of an admin area to the site where we get to be able to look to see which congregations have signed up, and which people, who has an account. But then to sort of look at the aggregation of the practices, so all 21 practices, to see how the scores from individual congregations come together. And then we can sort from most confidence at the top to least confidence at the bottom. And it's just kind of fascinating to me when I look at that. And I maybe I'll share it right now just because we're talking about it. It is very consistent with my own sort of perception of how something like that would come together, and just having an awareness of things that I know are troubling or kind of at the bottom of the list in terms of priorities, even within my own congregation. So let's see if I go to the dashboard here. And let's see if I go to practices. Can you see that? It's a table of practices. Are we? Yeah, okay. And so these are all 21 practices, but what I'm going to do here, I got to move. Got too many windows when you're controlling Zoom and sharing your screen. And let's see, put that there, and then I'm going to do this from. So the practices at the top, you can see at this point we've had 17 congregations weigh in on the aspect of having an accounting system. And so these are the things that we tend to be most confident about. And it sort of makes sense, like, okay, you got to have the accounting, right? That's pretty important. It's pretty hard to sort of skimp by and not do accounting. Usually people who are staff don't really appreciate it if you don't have the payroll part of it figured out. And some weeks they get their checks and other weeks that they don't. So that's another important one that, you know, we would expect to sort of be at the top. In general, compliance with financial and accounting best practices, even this idea of, you know, state and national pay standards and Synod guidelines for pay and that sort of thing. So you can see the things at the top that we feel most confident about. And, you know, I would say for anybody who's thinking about a place to start, we could use the collective wisdom across the congregations that have already participated to say, these areas at the top, they're probably the things that are a good place to start, right? Now, equally interesting to me is just the stuff at the other end of the spectrum. And so risk management, maintain property inventory. You know, this is something that I become aware of in my new position, that just, you know, there are HVAC systems, there are roofing systems, there are walls, there are parking lots, there are electrical systems and lighting systems. In all of these different things, even, you know, computer systems, security systems. And to what extent do we have kind of a master plan of what all exists, when it was put into service, when we might have some expectation of its need to be replaced or updated or whatever else? And then the one right above that, computer asset management, including hardware, software, and networking. I mean, that's a whole area just in and of itself, right? And so, you know, sort of a plan to say, well, we bought new computers 8 years ago, but maybe those computers aren't the best computers for us today, especially with all the stuff we need to do with video and Zoom. And one of the conversations we've been having at my church is just to say, well, we sort of equipped most people with desktop computers, but maybe it would make sense for more of them to have laptop computers, not because we want people to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we think it's important for them to take their work with them so they can work all the time. But if we have a sense that, you know, maybe new normal is more hours at home, fewer hours in the office, wouldn't it be nice for people to be able to take their files and their programs with them? And so, you know, the next time we do an upgrade, maybe we ought to think more seriously about laptops instead of desktops. Being a guy who used to do a lot of stewardship stuff, the third one from the bottom, annual stewardship plan, you know, that's kind of interesting to me, just from the standpoint that, you know, we tend to be confident about counting the money and tracking donations and paying our staff, not as confident about how do we engage people in the whole conversation about why they might be inspired and motivated to support what your congregation is doing. And what are the most effective ways of telling the stories that people, you know, are in a place where they say, you know what, I like what's going on here, and I want this to be an extension of who I am and the calling that God has given me to make a difference in the world. I'm inspired by this. Not I'm being motivated to throw money at a sinking ship, but I'm being motivated to support some really important work in the world. And then, the next one after that is mission support. I think of a story in my congregation where we were going through our budgeting for the upcoming year, and the person who was talking about the budget got to mission support, and he says, "Oh, and this is the part where we pay the Synod 10%." And then moved on to the next line item. And so when we had a chance to pause, I said, let's unpack that a little bit so people understand that this is an area where our church is allowed to conduct ministry through our ministry partners of our larger denomination. And so there's all sorts of ministries that we help support through our synod, whether it's campus ministry, whether it's camp ministry, seminaries, Lutheran colleges and universities, our support of Lutheran social services, so on and so forth. And, just being able to explain to people, that's what it's not a tax, that's 10% or whatever, however the tax is described in your congregation. So I mean, all of these things. So I don't know, Pastor Emily, if that works as an answer, in terms of if you have to start somewhere, maybe the stuff at the top is the stuff that's most important. And I can get you a screenshot of this. And we're interested in watching this over time. And we think that this particular reading actually would be a very useful piece of information for synods to say, okay, so if we're not feeling very confident about these things at the bottom, what can we do to help congregations become more confident in those areas, right? Maybe there's some webinars that we can do at a national level that would be on those particular topics. Any other comments? It's really not. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, Steve, sorry, Joe from Zumbro Lutheran in Rochester. Is there a summary page or report, like a one-pager after you take the assessment that maybe you can bring to the council?
That is a great suggestion. At this point, it probably would mean just printing out some web pages and saving them as PDFs. But I'm going to bring that up with our developer too and see if we could do some sort of a print-friendly version of the report. I like that idea. Yeah.
Here's a way. If you make up a little spreadsheet, you can record your scores and also your commentary as an easy way to communicate about it. It's very, very difficult to print out the survey from the website. It's pages and pages and pages. It's not very concise.
Yeah. Let me see what I can do on that. Thank you for that suggestion. And that's exactly the kind of feedback that is helpful for us.
Yeah, and I wonder in the meantime, Ellen, way to go. Nice chart. I'm wondering if you would be willing to make that accessible to others who would be interested in a paper version of that. Yeah. You're muted, but I can sense that you're saying yes.
So I just wanted to lift up too that, you have a lot of great resources through your Synod office, and they are absolutely motivated to be helping in any way that they can. I think also you have a lot of great resources in each other, and, a really powerful opportunity would be to do some sharing and collaboration across congregations. I don't know whether it would be within your conference or just anybody that would want to say, hey, we want to work through some of this stuff together, and we want to create kind of a learning environment. And maybe you have some experts in your congregation, another congregation has some different kinds of experts, and through that sharing and collaboration, you can uncover some new possibilities and kind of keep the topics on the front burner, so to speak, and learn from each other. So a lot of possibilities, I think. And if there's anything that I can do at any point, I don't know if Pastor Emily has circulated my email, but certainly she can get you in touch with me through the ELCA, and I can try to do whatever I can to answer questions and that sort of thing too. So I see we're at about time. Again, I want to thank you. Thanks for everything that you do. I know sometimes this work can be overwhelming. And really everything that happens in terms of the organizational aspects of being in the bread business happens because of the work that you're doing and allowing your congregation to have the kinds of ministries that it does.
Thank you, Steve. So before we wrap up, can everyone find on your screen, if it's accessible to you, there's a little button called reaction. Do you see where it says reaction toward the bottom? I would invite you to show the reaction of your choice about how you feel about the bread baking business. So basically show an emoji that you're ready to make some bread with some best practices. I'm going to choose this one at the moment. Steve, thanks for sharing your time with us tonight. Thanks for being involved in such a comprehensive tool that's meant to equip congregations in the bread baking business. Thanks for sharing your time with us. As we head back into the other parts of our life tonight, I'd love to offer a prayer. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. God, thanks for connection. Thanks for Zoom, which brings us all together. Thank you for these leaders who care so deeply about your work in the world. Thank you for Steve and for his team who are doing all they can to share these tools with congregations. God, we pray that you would help the people on this call tonight to know the next right step as they use resourceful servants in their context. And God, we pray for all of the congregations of our synod and all of the people of southeastern Minnesota that as they journey through this Holy Week, that they would encounter you in many and various ways. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. Good night.
Blessings to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.